Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Good afternoon. Good morning to some of you. We'll let everybody trickle in just a sec and we'll get started very shortly. Excellent. All right. Well, as all of you are trickling in, I want to once again welcome everybody to our fifth and final portion of our Transforming Family School Partnerships PTA National Standards webinar series. The webinar is going to formally begin at the top of the hour, and it will be fully recorded and sent out to you as a recorded webinar in a follow-up email. We highly recommend that you connect with National PTA and the Institute for Educational Leadership on social media. Feel free to follow our Facebook and our Twitter pages at National PTA, at IEL Connects, and at FCE Network. Use the hashtag PTA standards and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar. We will be sure to retweet some of your responses. And we really encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations with us on social media too. So as I mentioned before, the webinar will begin very shortly. It will be recorded and shared out with all of you afterwards as well. So hang tight. Thank you all for joining us. Okay, we're at the top of the hour, so let me formally welcome you all into today's webinar. My name is Daniel Aaron Price. I'm National PTA's Family and Community Engagement Manager, and I have just a few housekeeping details for all of you before we get started. So first and foremost, we would love for you to introduce yourself. So please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and or what organization you represent. We want to be sure that you select everyone so that everybody, including the panelists and the hosts, know who is here today. If the chat is not enabled currently, I will enable it right now. There you go. So feel free to post all of your information in the chat so we know who's here. All attendees are in listen-only mode today, but we highly encourage your engagement by posting any of the questions that you have arise throughout the webinar in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We have dedicated the last 10 to 15 minutes of this session to responding to some of the questions that you post, and we would love to field some of your questions to our panelists today as well. So as I mentioned before, the webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording, including all of the resources that you see shared as links in the chat, will be compiled in a shared drive and followed up with you via email to all webinar attendees today and all registrants who are unable to join us today. I would like to remind everyone that this is the fifth and final webinar in our 5-part Transforming Family School Partnerships series. We thank each and every one of you that have tuned into our previous conversations, and we encourage you to view and share the recordings of our previous webinars as well. We will be sure to place these links in the chat so you can access them. They will be sent out to you in a follow-up email as well, so you can look at them at your leisure. So with that being said, National PTA is very excited and grateful to partner with the Institute for Educational Leadership to co-host this webinar series. They have been a wonderful partner to PTA and greatly contributed to helping us update the national standards for family school partnerships and develop this webinar series. It is my honor today to introduce a really incredible individual who has been an advocate for family engagement and setting students up for success, Kwesi Rollins. So Kwesi is a member of IEL's senior leadership team and guides IEL's portfolio of programs designed to develop and support leaders with a particular emphasis on family and community engagement, early childhood education, and community-based leadership development. So with that being said, Kwesi, take it away.
Thanks so much, Daniel, and welcome everyone. Thanks to you also, Helen, and to all of our panel. We've got a wonderful conversation that we're about to have. We're, as always, very excited to be in deep partnership with the National PTA Center for Family Engagement on, not just this webinar series, and this, as Daniel said, is the last one in the series, but just across the board, like most webinars, this one is designed to help us explore the new standards for family school partnerships, but also to hear a variety of experiences with regard to the issues and the topics of the day. It goes without saying that now more than ever, engaging families, authentically listening to parents and students, and collaborating across boundaries, these are all the processes we need to get to the solutions we want. When you think about many of the school-based and out-of-school-based and community-based challenges that we face, I can't think of any solution that doesn't somehow include us working more closely together, doesn't somehow include us engaging authentically with families and students, and also just thinking a little bit outside of the normal box in doing so. Today's topic, collaborate with community. You're going to hear from some dynamic leaders, get all of their perspectives. This is obviously an important topic, and I look forward to hearing from this dynamic panel. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce the partner in crime, colleague, friend, Helen Westmoreland, who's the Director of Family Engagement at the National PTA, where she leads the association in managing their Center for Family Engagement. Helen?
Thank you so much, Kwesi. I could not just be more thrilled to be able to partner with IEL and you personally, because it's always wonderful to get to work together. So thank you all again for joining us. Here at National PTA, our mission is to engage and empower families and communities to advocate for all children, and partnering with like-minded organizations like IEL is so important to helping us do that. For those of you new to PTA, we're an organization of nearly 3 million members working together to make every child's potential a reality. And we are very excited for today's final conversation in our Transforming Family School Partnerships with the PTA National Standards webinar series. So we know, all of us, that families are essential partners in providing a great education for all of our kids. And we know from lots of research that students whose families are engaged do better in life. And even more so now, we also know that teachers in schools, in fact, do better and feel better when they're engaging families. The question is not really, does this matter anymore? It's how do we do it so that we can really be uplifting our families, schools, and communities together. This question is why over 20 years ago, National PTA created the National Standards for Family School Partnerships. These PTA National Standards set the bar for how we all should work together to support student success. Since their initial creation, the National Standards for Family School Partnerships have been used by PTAs, schools, districts, state education agencies, and even at one point, the U.S. Department of Education for accountability and support for strong family engagement. Before now, PTA's national standards were last updated in 2008, and I probably do not have to tell you that a lot has changed since then. So in the past 2 years, National PTA began the process of updating these national standards for family school partnerships with 3 main goals: incorporating new research and best practice, really uplifting the voices of families, educators, and youth, particularly those from historically marginalized or oppressed populations, to say what the vision of family school partnerships should look like, and overall to just improve the usefulness of these standards as a tool. So how do we do that? We partnered with PTAs. I know there are many in the audience here today. Thank you for joining us, and other nonprofits across the country to ensure we're hearing from the people who haven't always had a seat at the table. We're very proud of the inclusive process we use to listen to over 600 parents, educators, and community leaders and young people. We also scanned best practices and the evidence base, as well as engaged an expert advisory group of leading researchers and practitioners, including the wonderful Kwesi Rollins, to guide this update. So you can expect 4 things if you are new to the National Standards for Family School Partnership, 4 things to expect if you are familiar with them, for some small changes you'll see. So first, you'll see that the 6 main standards: welcome all families, communicate effectively, support student success, speak up for every child, share power, and last, what we're focusing on today, collaborate with the community, are still important. Those 6 things, those 6 standards are still very important and are the ones that stand. Below those standards at the goals and indicators level is where there are some fairly substantial changes. So second, this update explicitly centers on equity and inclusion, including guidance to help schools partner with our increasingly diverse families. National PTA is committed to making every child's potential a reality. And when we say every child, we mean every child. And then last, PTA's national standards now reflect a more broadened vision of student success that recognizes a more holistic approach to student learning and well-being. In 2008, during the last update, supporting student success was defined much more narrowly. And so we're really excited that now we can reflect all the ways we want our children to grow and succeed in life. And then last, we've added some clearer guidance for school principals in particular to be able to use these standards as a tool. So with all of that background, today's session will highlight National PTA's 6th standard for family school partnership, collaborate with the community. The goals of standard 6 are building a strong foundation for community partnerships, which was a new goal added in the update, and connecting the school with community partners. The update to this standard also focuses on alignment overall. We're so fortunate to be partnering with the Institute for Educational Leadership, who has been a leading champion for community schools in this webinar. The community school strategy transforms a school into a place where educators, local community members, families, and students work together to strengthen conditions for student learning and healthy development. As partners, they organize in and out of school resources, supports, and opportunities so that young people thrive. We are excited. You're going to hear a lot more about all those multiple perspectives today. Daniel is also going to put a resource in the chat for you if you are considering implementing community schools from the Community Schools Task Force, which included IEL and a number of other national organizations that they have recently developed. Speaking of experts, we have 4 incredible individuals to have this conversation today around schools collaborating with community organizations and members to connect students, families, and staff to more expanded learning opportunities, community service, and civic participation. I'm excited to hear from each and every one of them, and I am also very happy to introduce our moderator. We have Christy Sweat with us, who's the president of the National School Boards Association and current school board member with Salt Lake City School District. Christy has been a tireless public education advocate for the past 30 years and has an extensive background in community service and educational advocacy. And we chose Christy to moderate for today's conversation because school board members are really often at that intersection between schools, where they're providing oversight, and communities, where they are representing the voice of the public, and listening to them. So Christy, we are excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. I will turn it over to you to introduce the rest of the panel and get our conversation going.
Thank you so much, Helen. I'm so excited to be here with everyone today. And we have, like you said, a great panel today. So let's just go ahead and get started. And I want you to know that if you want to see the full bios, that you can look in and click on the link in the chat, correct? So you'll be able to see any of those bios today. So let's get some introductions going. Okay, Dr. Kim Robinson is the Executive Vice President for Youth Quality at the Forum for Youth Investment and leads the Forum's Weikart Center for Youth Program Quality, overseeing efforts to strengthen youth programs, the youth program quality. Whitney Fields is the Director of Family Leadership at the National Center for Families Learning, NCFL. Whitney supports a team around NCFL's family leadership work. Such work includes programs like Activate Local and Activate National, and other co-design and coalition building work aimed at family-based leadership opportunities. Jose Munoz joined the Institute for Educational Leadership in 2017 as the director of the Coalition of Community Schools, bringing over 25 years experience of building systems in communities at the intersections of out-of-school time, juvenile justice reform education, and employment for well-being and prosperity of youth and families. Marco Harris is the principal of Highland High School, the oldest standing high school with the most diverse student population in Albuquerque Public Schools. Hornet Nation has increased its graduation rate by 16% over the last 8 years under his leadership. So thank you all for being here today. I'm going to throw a question out to everybody, and let's just have you answer them in the way that I just introduced you. So we would start with Kim, then Whitney, then Jose, and then Marco, okay? So here is your question. I would like to start today's conversation by highlighting exemplary connections between schools and communities. Panelists, in your experience, what do strong partnerships between schools and communities look like? Can each of you please provide our audience with an example of school-community collaboration that resulted in setting students and families up for success? Take it away, Kim.
Thank you. Excited to be here today. So we often see in our work with community-based youth-serving organizations that sometimes developing that partnership, that effective partnership with schools can be a challenge because they're often sort of resources and sort of connections that flow through school districts that may, that aren't always sort of as evenly connected with community-based partners. And so having opportunities to build relationships and cultivate partnerships between schools and communities is really critical for ensuring that those connections can exist and really support students and families. So my organization played a role as a national technical assistance provider for the Wallace Foundation's Partnerships for Social and Emotional Learning initiative, which supported schools and out-of-school time partnerships in 6 different cities around the country. And having intentional time to support and cultivate the relationships between the school partners and the out-of-school time partners was really critical for setting the initiative up for success, the communities up for success, and the students and families that they served up for success. And so it created opportunities to be able to expand learning opportunities beyond the school day into out of school time and to have connections that would further the young person's experience. And so we saw in one of the cities, the district had an initiative that said, we want to provide out of school time learning opportunities, dramatically expand those in the district. And rather than the school having to try to stand up a bunch of new programs, they were able to leverage existing partnerships in the communities with programs that already existed, that were already serving students and families, but to do so in a way that was more interconnected. So those, being able to leverage those existing capacity that exists within communities, I think is a really important and key opportunity in strengthening the partnerships.
Right. So I'll jump in and answer the question. First, my name is Whitney. I'm happy to be here. I'm with the National Center for Families Learning and just honored to be a part of this panel and with you all. Saw in the chat, lots of you are from all over the country, so great to see and happy to be with you and share space with you today. Backing up a little bit, I'll talk kind of about our work on the whole at NCFL, so National Center for Families Learning for short. And then I'll provide one specific example within my camp of work, which is leadership, that we're doing kind of this collaboration, partnership, and leadership development type work. But on the whole, NCFL can't do what it does as a national organization without partnerships. So we are a nonprofit headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky, and working nationally. And we really support whole family success and well-being through education solutions for families with the goal of eradicating poverty through those education solutions for families and really driven by families. And so, we know that's a lofty goal, and that requires partnerships within schools and within community and across sectors to accomplish that. So we've been in this work for 30 plus years, and partnerships is the reason how we can do this work and scale the work. And so our partnerships include kind of a variety in the sectors, so families, educators, literacy advocates, and communities. And this helps feed our core family learning system model, which is a part of our new 60 by 30 vision. So we intend to scale our work into 60 communities by 2030 to create whole family equitable solutions and equitable communities. And that vision alone needs partnerships on the ground. And so to seed that family learning system work, which includes family literacy, kind of our legacy-based work, and family engagement work, and then family leadership work, which I oversee and run. So partnerships are crucial because we know as a national organization, we need to coordinate and seed those, and then support on the ground work and kind of move out and let that sustain itself. One element of that family learning system within 60 by 30, as I mentioned, is our family leadership work, which I oversee. And so we have a model called Activate, pretty intentional in the name of activating leadership skills. But we also know that leadership programming doesn't start and stop with formal programming, that everyone is bringing something to the table. So one example of how we use kind of that coordination and alignment with leadership programming is through our Activate Local model, which is embedded in local communities and is a cohort style model to develop leadership-based skills. And one current example of that is within Jeffersonville County Public Schools, is where Louisville, Kentucky is. So the district kind of approached us with wanting to seed and activate local within the district. And so we came on board with the district and really seeded that cohort of parents that will graduate next month. And also, you know, they might have a variety of engagement in terms of leadership skills, but really providing a platform for that cohort-based model. And then seeding future parent engagement in the district. We're working right now on a parent advisory council. So just an example of how that partnership kind of blends in and, you know, takes all folks in coordination and alignment. And again, happy to be here and look forward to talking more with you about some of our work later on.
Thank you, Whitney. Okay, Jose.
Appreciate you. Thank you, Christy, for moderating. And I want to just thank the National PTA for hosting this. And of course, my brother and mentor, Kwesi, for stepping up and saying some good, powerful words on behalf of the Institute for Educational Leadership. Again, I'm Jose Munoz, I'm the director for the Coalition for Community Schools. So I love this question. What do partnerships, strong partnerships between schools and communities look like? Because every day I get a chance to wake up and hope to motivate a country of developing just that. So we have a broad vision of the Coalition for Community Schools. And that's what we really want to see is communities where everybody feels they belong, where they work together, and where they thrive. So when you say what it looks like, you can put that to a number of different ways to go about doing that, but it's about a feeling of belonging that we want to folks. We want to go into communities and see folks actually working hand in hand together on the behalf of the children of that community, but also on behalf of each other. We all need a hand sometimes to support us. We all need encouragement, support us, and we all have the ability to support and encourage other people as well. Look, first of all, I'm a father of 5 and a husband. So being a father of 5, that could look a lot of different ways when you have children from everywhere from preschool to college, which I had at one point. I needed a lot of support. So what that could look like, a little example, what I think of, and I actually took, when I heard the question, I'll put a link in the chat. You can take a look at the video later, but there's a school in the southeast quadrant of Albuquerque, not yours, Marco, you could talk about yours, but, but there's a school in the southeast elementary school who had an influx of immigrant moms who really weren't attending the school with their children, their kindergartners, and weren't even looking for means to actually support their families. So long story short, what happened when the community school coordinator engaged families and learned of this, they began to work with the school, with the universities, the community colleges, other nonprofit partners, the husbands within their families, and 14 of these moms stayed with each other and supported each other along with the school to actually develop a preschool cooperative right on the campus of an elementary school. These 14 moms in 2 years actually graduated with a certificate in early childhood. And 5 of those moms decided to go on and with the help of the different community partners, including the university, help design a cooperative business where maybe they couldn't work in our country, but guess what? You can own a business and still earn money in our country. So that's just a great example of a school and community partnership. I want folks to think about, imagine on your own what it could look like when you create a sense of people belonging. The evidence of that would be schools would be busting out at the seams. Streets would have kids and families and adults actually playing and working together at the same time. So through any community, that's what we want to see. We believe that a community school is a vehicle to get there. And that's why we're a coalition for community schools. So appreciate this conversation.
Thank you so much, Jose. All right, Marco.
Oh, I did it. I've been practicing this for 2 years and then I forgot to unmute. Sorry about that. All right. With that said, I want to thank you all again for inviting me to this venue. I think I'm honored, definitely humbled to talk about my experiences around at least engagement with our partners and our families, and hopefully the growth and positive outcomes with our families. So I too have been in this work for about 15 years as a community school leader. What I would ultimately say, what creates a strong partnership and or community look is being a yes principal. There are things, unfortunately, in which I believe the community school framework or philosophy comes to the table with that you may be spending a couple extra hours, whether that be in the morning or in the evening, ensuring that your families ultimately have access to those opportunities in which I think our system provides or can provide. I think, to be cliche, I think if we were like a vacuum and had the ability to implement the national PTA 6 pillars and standards, that's exactly what a strong partnership and community would ultimately look like. In addition to that, I think it has to be, I think somebody said it earlier, intentional. We function at the school site with a mission vision. We have these crazy things called 90-day plans that actually are instructional practices or behavioral shifts that we attempt to implement each year. And so I think with that, we have to be highly intentional with how we garner certain partners throughout our community. It has to be supportive, obviously. I would like to just throw out a thank you to our ABC Community School Partnership. That's the Albuquerque Bernalillo County Community School Partnership, which is essentially an entity that has leveraged a multitude of resources and funding for at least Highland High School for us to continue to kind of do the community school work with our community school coordinator and so forth. You know, it needs to be inspirational and motivational. I am lucky enough to have grown up in this position with my brother, friend, mentor, Mr. Jose Munoz. And one of the things when he walked through my door, he promised me in 3 years that we would have an increased graduation rate by 10%. Again, I believe Daniel shared, there was a 48% graduation rate here at Highland High School. With that promise, of course, my first thought was, you're crazy. You know, there's a lot of work that I think goes into that. And you know, I was young in the position and still didn't know what that actually meant. I will honestly say 3 years after the fact, we did not meet that mark. I will tell you, we got it to 7%. But year 5, we actually got it to a 14% increase. And then we've been jumping ever since. And so with Jose, one of his philosophical tenets is you got to be crazy to make change. And that is ultimately how I've presented myself. I believe in my district is I'm a little crazy, and that makes me a yes man, and I am willing to do what I need to do to provide those opportunities. One tangible example is, and I'll talk a little later in my greater part, but one of my tangible examples for family engagement and supports, I'm a firm believer stabilization is huge within our philosophy and especially within our community. And so we have provided actual financial literacy classes for a number of our parents in collaboration with Stein, which is a faith-based kind of group here in Albuquerque. And with that financial literacy class, at the end of 10 weeks, these parents not only received a certificate and understanding of what it means to kind of be financially responsible, but also committed to the opportunity of acquiring a $40,000 grant to purchase their first house within their community. And so we are just lucky to facilitate and be part of those opportunities for our families, because what we know is if we can stabilize, then we can communicate how our families can access. And then there's this great thing that we could achieve called equity across the board. So I thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy, and looking forward to talking a little later.
Thank you, Marco. Oh, such great insights from all of you. Thank you so much. So we're going to jump to individual questions, and I'm going to start with you, Kim. So Kim joins our panel today with over a decade of experience in program evaluation. The Forum for Youth Investment emphasizes the need to connect youth to specific ideas, services, and networks to strengthen socio-emotional and academic impact in student populations. What are some of the best practices for building bridges between schools and communities to effectively connect students and families to these expanded opportunities?
Thank you. I was inspired by the previous comment about needing to be crazy to make change, and I think that's part that's part of sort of casting the vision of what's possible. And at the Forum for Youth Investment, we're trying to cast a vision of strong youth development ecosystems in communities across the country. And a youth development ecosystem represents all of the people, the places, and the possibilities that can influence and shape learning and development. And so, of course, that's schools, but of course, it's also community organizations and other institutions in a community, and how those collectively work together to create opportunities for learning and development. And so when we think about best practices to create and shape a strong youth development ecosystem, I talked before about the importance of partnership, but it's also a partnership towards a shared culture and a shared a shared language around what is good for young people and how do we work on achieving that together. And so oftentimes school folks, community folks, other agencies talk about similar things in different ways. I used to work in public school systems in New York City and Baltimore, and now I work more in the out of school time space. And I've definitely been struck by, like, we have different terminologies that we use in these respective spaces, and that in and of itself is often a barrier to effective partnership and collaboration. And so that opportunity for intentional partnership around what are our shared goals for our young people, for strengthening that notion of ecosystem in our community, and how can we use those shared goals to build a shared culture and a shared language around what it will take to improve outcomes for young people and families. One of the practices that I think is really strong that can support that culture building and shared language is through continuous quality improvement practices. So having a cycle, a regular cycle to assess what's important, to make sense of that data that you've gathered, to create a plan and identify opportunities for improvement. Marco talked about 90-day plans, like, you know, this notion of continuous improvement is one that's familiar with schools, that folks are already engaged in, but there's opportunities to bring in parents and communities into those continuous improvement processes, and that helps to create the shared culture and the shared language toward improvement. One critical element of building a continuous quality improvement system is really having a shared definition of what good looks like. So, you know, if we all have different ideas about what the goal is or what it takes to improve, then it's really hard to be aligned in those improvement efforts, and show a shared definition of what good looks like. What are the experiences that we want students and families to have in our community, whether they're in school, whether they're in community-based organizations, whether they're in other spaces. And so standards for quality practice that describe the kind of things that we want young people to experience, and the kinds of adult practices that facilitate those experiences are really critical. So the Forum for Youth Investment, we use what we call the Youth Program Quality Assessment, which is an observational assessment tool that can be used to observe the practices in a youth program or in a space where adults and young people are coming together, and can support around aligning what good looks like and how can we make improvements toward becoming even better. And so it helps to both set the standard and gather data that can be used to improve in a coordinated way to build that coordination and collaboration that's really critical for shaping the youth development ecosystem.
Gosh, Kim, thank you so much. I love the idea of the shared definitions. I think that's so important for us to have those in the work that we all do. So thank you for sharing. Okay, we're going to jump to Whitney. So Whitney, you support teams around family and leadership work. Activate National is NCFL's program designed to center Black, Indigenous, and people of color representation and advocacy to develop inclusive and equitable early childhood programs in communities across the country. As a lead contributor to this program, can you please describe how inclusive and equitable programs strengthen cultural competence between schools, communities, and especially within diverse municipalities?
Thank you for that question. I will say one of the things, I came to NCFL in November of last year, and have been in previous community organizing spaces. And it was so refreshing to come into an organization who already gets it. And you didn't have to be the one person in the room that's like, hey, maybe we should, get outside these walls and ask people. It's been really nice to be in that space here where everyone is asking that question when we're making decisions of who's at the table and why. And really, we're rooted in everything that we do, particularly moving to 60 by 30 is rooted in equity principles. And we use a framing called co-design. So when I came on board, we all had to read, co-design or Beyond Sticky Notes. And it really is, getting at the center of equity and getting into community. And it's really, with community, not to community. So it's just been, refreshing to be in that space. One of the things that I like that we do across all of our programming that's just kind of systematized with our work is a series of inclusive practices. So we help break down any barriers for parent participations in our programming. So if you need childcare, we offer childcare. We do transportation, food and things like that, which is pretty normal in community parent spaces. But one of the things that I like that we really do is provide opportunities for language justice. So if you are more comfortable speaking in your heart language, we will accommodate that. And so we at all of our in-person and online meetings accommodate for live interpretation. So you have someone on doing translation and interpretation in real time. And then if you ever attend any of our conferences and in-person convenings, you'll see that. So again, just to highlight and applaud, I'm relatively new to the work, but that was really refreshing to come in and really, know that we get that. And so I talked a little bit about in my intro about Activate Local, and I want to spend some time about Activate Natural, which you mentioned in the question. I really love this model because it does that intentional connecting. So the Activate National model is a 12-month cohort style model. We're in our current second of 3 kind of pilot phase with this work, but it's intentionally focused on BIPOC communities. Right now we have representation across the country and tribal regions in this cohort, and they're really looking at inequities within a particular sector. And I think what's unique about this model is folks have to apply in pairs. So it's not just like with Activate Local, you can just be a parent or a caregiver and apply for that cohort. This is really intentional in the fact that you have to be paired up. So it has to be a parent or caregiver within a childcare setting and paired with a practitioner of that setting. Ideally, that practitioner would have decision-making power within the childcare center. So it could be a lead teacher, a curriculum developer, a director. And so they apply in pairs and are selected in pairs. Right now we have, I think, 24 folks within our cohort, but they go through not only leadership evolving type skill sets, they're also doing, data and research finding and really creating that space of shared learning from various perspectives, but all at, looking at unearthing inequities within the sector itself. So they do, some data and research. There's a component where they, pick a certain equity issue and then have work groups and they break out and do various kind of research and fact finding. They do a module on shifting narratives, how certain narratives, particularly in the early childcare sector, can be harmful. And so they work to unearth those narratives and create new narratives, and then do some social media campaigning. And so, with that, it really breaks down silos, not only within the pairs themselves, but also from across the nation, and seeing, that each, issues are the same and different in communities. And so they get opportunities to share that. And I do want to share some quotes that I think really speak to the value of creating that, breaking down silo and pairs. So we do pre and post and kind of midterm survey data with our participants. And a couple of quotes that, that we just got back recently, I think really speaks to the value. So this was from a parent. They said that working as a team makes it a lot more complete with different points of view. A practitioner mentioned that becoming more open-minded to understanding different experiences than my own and allowing others to create their own narratives when sharing their experience. That came from a practitioner. And then one more from a practitioner. I'm learning that there are others like me who think and feel the same way about wanting change for the right reason. I'm not alone in wanting to fight for what's right, and that I'm becoming a stronger advocate. So I could speak all day, but I think those quotes really speak to the power of that. And then one thing that we're working towards doing in our third cohort year, which will start in 24, is really being intentional. I mentioned co-design is something that we embed in our programming. And so we're going to co-design with parents and practitioners in year 3 to create some solutions to the inequities in the childcare sector. So we're looking at creating with them an anti-racism guide, and then other various tools and resources for the sector. So again, having those dual perspectives and breaking it down and being BIPOC centered allows space for that shared power and collaboration. And then, currently, I think some of that is already working. One of the questions we also asked on the survey this year was what they hope to implement. And one of the practitioners said that they want to implement more culturally responsive programs and implicit bias trainings within their center. So again, I think just allowing that space, calling the inequities, I don't think anyone in the space is masking that is a thing, and allowing for realness and conversation and trust building with that. And again, I have a really great team that leads that and creates that space and trust building with parents, which I think is really crucial. And then ultimately, the hope is that like I mentioned in my intro, that leadership programming doesn't start and end with us. There are many factors. Everyone's bringing something to the table, but that maybe we can give a couple more tools in the toolkit or tool belt to then go back and be advocates, their own best advocates in their own community, and thus, impacting their schools, their communities, their political systems, their churches. And so, so that's like the intent and I think purpose and the power behind some of these programmings. Thanks for the opportunity to share. And I'll touch more on some tools and resources later around some, strategies and engagement tactics, but appreciate the question.
Thank you so much, Whitney. I think being a part of the community is so important. And as I think about what you're talking, when you're talking about an anti-racism, guide, having that be also a part of the NSBA toolkit would be so helpful for local school boards. So I would be really intrigued in seeing something like that. But thank you for talking about the community piece. That really resonates with me. Okay, so now that Kim and Whitney have provided us with foundational knowledge on effective community school partnerships, I would like to highlight the strategy and implementation constructed from these strong collaborative efforts. So Jose, you bring 25 years of experience of building systems in communities. Jose, our audience may not be as familiar with community school model. Can you please explain what a community school is? Additionally, can you share the successes of the community school strategy, especially as it relates to supporting strong basis of sustainable community partnerships with schools?
Sure. No, appreciate that. So you'll find a number of definitions of what a community school is, but as I was just listening to some great explanations about the way people practice, that's really at the crux of it. So I'll give you the very simple purpose and functional purpose of a community school, and that's really a way to organize the relationships that surround a school and the number of resources around children and their families. What we all want to see is all students and their families flourish in thriving school communities. And so within a community school, and my friends at Learning Policy Institute, Brookings, and the National Center for Community Schools, when we came together to begin to look at the evolution of what a community school looks like. We centered it right around that purpose: all students flourish and thrive in school communities. We couldn't have done this without first engaging hundreds of people in this process. And throughout that engagement, folks really defined, when you talk about what a community school is, it starts with the purpose. And then you got to think about who actually drives the work. And from school staff to community school coordinators, youth, their families, multitude of community partners. But then there's some conditions that folks need to have created or be part of creating to support children and their families. And that leads to some key practices. As I think about the continuous improvement discussed, oftentimes people will start with the programs and the practices, and starting with the actual engagement of using the multitude of communication power that a school has as a vehicle to communicate, to collaborate, and to coordinate these things leads to the key practices. And of course, you need some supportive infrastructure. I believe Daniel put in the chat earlier a link to the essentials framework and guide, so you could take a look earlier in there. And Daniel, if you could put it back in, that'd be great, just for that purposes. So that's kind of what it is. So that's why I say simply, it's about the way you go about it. But I think Whitney and Kim did a fabulous job of even describing that within their own work of bringing people together frequently around issues that they care about or desires that they wish to come about, and begin to plan together and collaborate, that all for the purpose of everybody being better off. As far as sustainability, so this is the part I like. Marco talked about the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Community School Partnership, for short, ABC, Community School Partnership, which is where the latest local place I came from without that 25 years into this role here. Let me give it to you in a broad spectrum first, from a national. There's like over 80 million families across our country. There's 19 million municipalities, 5,000 plus universities, a couple of thousand United Ways, hundreds of thousands of nonprofits, but all of them come around for the same purpose, and multiple organizations as well too. I'm missing, I know that, but all of them come around for the center purpose of making sure our young people thrive. When you have each neighborhood collaborating in such a way as I described, and communicating on a regular basis, and you have a way to crowdsource all the great thinking and ideation that comes from each neighborhood and local school, you can then inform equitable policy, practices, financing, solutions, and you begin to see people thriving across an entire geography of population, whether that be in a city, a county, or maybe just a neighborhood there. So from the sustainability part, it comes from, I think Thomas Jefferson is the one that said it, a well-informed electorate is a strong democracy depends on a well-informed electorate. So you have to have a mechanism in place to inform people, and there's community schools is that mechanism in the way you go about informing people to make sure that they are living very prosperous lives, not just living life at this moment. So there's no one better than my partner who's going to talk next. I'm gonna let him talk a little bit about that. Marco, as he talked about, I've seen him go from a Taj Mahal version of here's all the money to what he built at Highland High School, which my wife graduated from, by the way, from Highland High School, what he built there. And I never forget, he called me one day, Marco, I'll probably misquote you, but you're like, okay, so this is a community school. Like he said, I had to have a yes principle. I'll leave it for him to tell that story.
Jose, thanks so much. But I think we can tell, the mentorship that's been going on between you and Marco. So this is going to be really exciting to hear from Marco. So Marco, you're joining us today to describe your work as a principal at Highland High School, a community school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So thank you for all the hard work that you are doing, Marco, and strengthening community school partnerships in your district. I would love it if you would provide us with a few examples of what you have done at Highland High School to connect the school to community partners. Please describe how these partnerships benefit families and student outcomes.
Excellent. Thank you again for that question. I do want to bring up some PTSD concerns and/or issues first. Yes, I did have the ability to actually run a full-service community school model back in 2008, and this is part of this PTSD here, where, you know, yes, as it was the Taj Mahal, we still had to sort of plan out what the pillars were and how those pillars connected back within our community and our demographic. And Helen, I really appreciate you kind of articulating the PTA's sort of pillars and maybe a disconnect in 2008 and the strengthening and the growth of those pillars over the last, 15, 16 years. Because part of being how would you say, a budding community school principal, family engagement under those old tenets that we felt that we had implemented in the state of New Mexico, or at least Albuquerque, were very narrowed. And those of you that have been around PTAs for years, right? I think the first thought, 2008, I'm reflecting back, 2008 was, let's get some membership going, and then let's raise some money for X or Y. I mean, that was a very simple and general interpretation. I know there was greater work that was taking place, but I knew in trying to have authentic, as Queasy said, family engagement, that in my realm and the families I worked with wasn't very authentic. And so we had to truly open that door. I think Dr. Patina Love said that principals' ultimate responsibility are to be organizers, and more specifically, community organizers. And so that's where that yes principal piece comes from. That's where those connecting pieces come from. So let me just talk a little more about some of the firm examples. One firm example for a community school, I believe, to work effectively is you need a community school coordinator, obviously, who is my right man, my right woman, my right NBD, whom is that person whom I consider my assistant principal. For lack of better words, that's my voice. And I hope he gets it right when he shares my voice. The next thing is you need a family liaison. Lauda and Charlton are my community school coordinator and family liaison, and they are amazing. And truly, 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 the work cannot be fostered, facilitated, implemented without those two key roles, key positions. So when we're talking about resources, if you're talking about running this, that's number one: a yes principal, family liaison, and a community school coordinator. All right, let me move into some examples around the pillars. So one great pillar within the framework is extended learning opportunities. I've been lucky enough to garner or be part of garnering a 21st century grant. For those educators that are out there, I hope you know that that's really a grant that is to strengthen skills within language or English language arts, I should say, as well as math. And in that relationship, we actually had the ability to partner with the Boys and Girls Club, who is not only facilitating opportunities after school, outside the school day, for tutoring and internship opportunities, but they also facilitate what we call the hub, the Hornet Union Building. For those of you that have been on college campuses, it's a resource center. It's where a kiddo can show up, play pool, get some behavioral supports, can get some academic supports. And so it's a full-fledged sort of Boys and Girls Club. We call it the club also, that functions outside the school day, that actually is a really cool and unique feature that I think many of our schools are going to have to figure out. How do we occupy our young people's minds, since that's when they tend to get in trouble, when they're not in our hands, right? From 3 to 6 or 3 to 7. The next thing would be our integrated support services. One example is we have a great relationship with UNM Medical Group. It's actually, we have the ability to provide a full service school-based health center where behavioral health, medical health, and dental services are provided within this particular venue. We talk about why that's great for the family. Why is that easy? We talk about attendance. Attendance has been a major concern across the country, I believe, for youth attending school. Well, we know that if I go to a dentist appointment, that is not an hour, even though it's a cleaning, it becomes a full day where the family it either has a hard time getting back to school, or we make it a day. We go eat lunch and go to the zoo and enjoy that. But again, having those resources on site have been phenomenal in changing the culture of attendance and accessing those services and which are needed on a timely basis. I can talk to you about our family student engagement pillar, which is probably obviously something in which is always growing. I had an opportunity to talk to the National Honor Society tonight, right? And scholarship is part of what their tenets or pillars are. So the idea of lifelong learning, and I think this is the big point I want to make is I don't know today. Well, I know today what is an authentic way to communicate with our families. Tomorrow it's going to shift and change because that is what our world brings and provides. And so we've engaged parents. I told you a little earlier in literacy classes to give them option and access to an opportunity to buy their own home within our community. We have placed parents and students on our instructional council. Their feedback is important on our campuses. We've also placed students and parents within our community school council, which is our outside, which is our partner council, right? We cannot leverage the opportunities without having a sort of a fixed group of brains to work our families in our school through some of the trials and tribulations we feel. I also would like to say that one of our greatest concerns that we've, I think, really put a major resource in play is obviously housing securities after the COVID. There have been a number of young people, families that have been displaced due to a multitude of different opportunities. And we work directly with the county commissioner's office as well as the New Mexico Black Leadership Council to actually leverage opportunities for our families when they come to the table and say, we're being kicked out of X space or Y space, we can stabilize, right? I think that was something I had said at the beginning is real important for a community school model is we need to stabilize our families so that they then can communicate what is needed, at which point in time we can start growing, right, and moving forward. So there's another tangible example. We also use Future Focus, which is a nonprofit here in town, to connect our young people to internship opportunities, paid internship opportunities. So usually that's a profession of their love or their choice, right, that they're excited about. I think the last two pieces that I'd like to really talk about are the collaborative leadership component and really high academic outcomes, which is another pillar that was added to our community school framework. I believe the high academic outcomes, that's something we have to do internally as staff. We have to really figure out ways and how to connect and engage our students to get them to school, to be excited about coming to school. So providing the service where we can get their teeth cleaned, I mean, that's one thing, but what about the instruction that's taking place in the class? And then how do we connect that to sort of, right, their movement and their real life opportunities in which we can provide the next day? So that's something in which I feel internally we are trying to do. We are using the culturally and linguistically responsive teaching techniques and strategies to achieve that. And we're also using a whole new framework around our grading practices around grading for equity. Last, the collaborative leadership piece that I just touched on. We can't do any of this if we're not talking, if we're not on the same page instantly. I cannot harvest a partner or garner a partner who is wanting to do completely different work than what we are doing on the school site. So if somebody doesn't fit into the work of idea of connecting with students, that's it. So I am going to end there, and I thank you for the time and opportunity to share.
Thank you, Marco. There was so much packed into what you said. I mean, we could just talk about that component for quite some time, couldn't we? I think that communities, it's just so important to be connected to our communities and to our families around our kids, isn't it? So thank you so much. Okay, so I think that we're going to be jumping to our questions from our audience. Is that right? I think that that's where we're headed. Perfect. Okay, so it looks like we've got Helen, there looks like there's a question that you want to, is that right? Is it Helen that wants to answer this question, or should I go to the second one? Let's see. Okay, here's the question. How can you improve family, community engagement, involvement when the administration that runs the school is not keen on actually engaging? And this is from Letitia Morehouse. Let's see. We just open that up to anybody who'd like to jump in.
I have no, this is Marco. I can attempt to answer this for you, but if you have resistant administration who is on a school site, it makes it very difficult to implement this strategy and move forward. So I believe what you always have to do, and I laugh and that I would promote this, is, but you get a quadri of your parents and you get a quadri of your family. You get together, you have a conversation about what you would like to see, where you would want to go. This is the knowledge you have of, right, your community, your school. And then I think you take that, if you can't sit down with the administrator and press upon he or she that this is where we as a school community want to go, then I think you always have to bring in other leadership, and whether that be an associate superintendent, like in our case, or a board member. I think it's important for you to continue to put back for what you and your supports and your voice are that you would like to see.
Thank you, Marco. Okay, let's go to our next question. This is from Sarah Hernandez. Do any of the speakers have information or resources on how they have engaged local childcare programs to partner with the schools? That is a really good question. Anybody willing to jump in on that one?
I'll go ahead and jump in. Not so much a resource. I think what you heard here today is a resource in regards to reaching out and including people based upon what families and young people are saying. When you include some organizations who already provide early childhood care, and even quantify, here's how much is needed at this location or school, people begin to do things that just make sense. And so I think from there, it comes to the logistics of forming what that partnership looks like. What I've seen everywhere from a state senator provide the funding for a portable to go on a school's ground, to a city who actually operates early childhood centers on the property, to expanding the preparation of parents providing childcare in their homes. So I think it could look very different. I think it depends heavily upon your context and what your actual partnerships are, and readiness for families to step in and either provide the knowledge and or the service itself.
I can comment briefly, not from
go ahead with
necessarily the school, like connecting to the school perspective, but I know, our Activate National centers on early childcare providers. And again, just to reiterate, the allowing space for room for collaboration from both the practitioners and parent side is like really valuable in moving towards those solutions. And also like having a shared agenda and maybe even a policy outcome or recommendation that then can go back. So again, just not losing sight of that collaborative shared power space to really push and get to towards some solutions in, your communities.
Thank you, Whitney. I think that just from a perspective of a school board member, that this is one of the things we talk about all the time, that after school and what that looks like for parents. It's a huge demand. So it's a constant conversation that we're having. Okay, let's keep moving on. We've got some great questions here from Naomi. What are the strategies you've used to partner with families who are the least engaged, the ones who would not play a leadership role or join a parent council? Ooh, that's a good one too. It's great, Marco.
I'd love to jump in and just share an example. I think when we first started playing with sort of the community school framework within Albuquerque Public Schools, we actually had a great strategy around what we called Homework Diner. And Homework Diner was a way in which some of those parents who typically weren't the leaders on the campus or who wanted to necessarily be engaged in parent organizations, it gave students and families a forum to actually have a formalized dinner And then there was a space in which they acquired whatever the information or whatever kind of the topic was for that particular homework diner. It was actually something that was very successful at the elementary school level. We played with it at the middle school level. When I moved up to the high school, I actually shifted that out of my Taj Mahal and called that the college career diner. And so for about 3 years, we functioned on bringing those parents who were scared to share their voices, giving them a nice, quiet, calm, safe space to be able to access what they were needing, at that time. So that's one strategy.
Thank you, Marco.
Can I just add on a little bit there? Just
Absolutely, Jose, please do.
Yeah. So within that process, what you're talking about is what we would normally do to cultivate friendship. There's typically you break bread, there's an engaging. So think of it like your house. When people come to your house, there's a foyer interest. Hey, how you doing? So where is that happening on a regular basis at your school? Then you move the conversation to a living room setting, where it's typically a bigger group of people coming together and they're having some broad conversations. Typically from those household gatherings, a couple of people or few may break off and go to a table somewhere and sit down and share a meal. So Marco, what he's describing, homework diner too, is having that from foyer to living room to small group kind of discussions on a regular basis, because you got to realize, relationships take a frequency and consistency in the conversation to form the partnership itself.
Thank you so much, Jose. I wish we had more time. There are some really great questions, but we're going to have to move through our program, and I'm going to throw this to Kwesi now so that he can take off from here.
So, and I think we will have an opportunity to get to some of those questions in the closing remarks. But thanks everyone again. What's been interesting, and we've had some great metaphors in this conversation. We got the Taj Mahal. We're inviting folks into the home, and it's a gradual process. And I think, it all goes back to, especially in a time like this, how are we creating a sense of belonging? We're in a time in our country and frankly in the world where it's really very divisive. There's just a lot of turmoil. I think that's playing out in our young people in the form of mental health crises and other things. It's playing out among our staff and families as extra stress. And so creating a sense of belonging, which you all have talked about, is really a big part of what's important up front before you can get to the part of really working more closely together, working in deeper partnership, getting to the place of shared definition, shared agenda. I love that at NCFL, National Center for Families Learning, you're talking about activating some stuff, because we have all of the ingredients that we need to get to where we want to go, but they've got to be activated, and we've got to have some intentionality. And we should be reminded that there are lots of ways to be engaged, and not all parents necessarily want to be on the front lines, sitting at the table on the committee, but that doesn't mean that they don't want to be engaged. And Marcos, thank you so much for your examples, because there are lots of ways to engage. There are lots of ways to be creative. Some of that does mean thinking outside of the box and being a little crazy, but good crazy. I think that a lot of times people are resistant to taking this on because they don't fully understand it. And especially for principals and folks in leadership, it's not always obvious from the very beginning what the benefits of this thing are going to be. And when you're already under a lot of pressure, when you're already under a lot of stress, sometimes everybody agrees with the idea of collaborating on some level because they're attracted to the outcomes of good collaboration. So that gets their eye, but the steps that it takes to get there are not always obvious, and the investment to get there is not always obvious for folks. And so leadership is key. We've got to keep working with our leaders. We can't give up on our leaders. We've got to keep just, trying to get everybody to be closer to being on the same page about which way we're going. And that's how we're going to get to the collective impact. And many of you have heard this term collective impact, right? It's a term that was really based on the experience of implementing the community school strategy in Cincinnati. Everybody wants impact, right? Everybody wants these great outcomes. but the key word is collective. You can't get there if we don't work together. So it's not enough to agree to all the stuff that's on the piece of paper about collective impact. We have to actually behave differently. And all of us have a role to play in that. And I think what we've heard today is all of the variety of entry points from the Forum for Youth Investment, certainly at the National School Boards Association, National PTA. We're really all trying to get folks to behave a little bit differently, to collaborate a little bit more closely, because we know we can't get to the impact. We can't get there if we don't behave differently. And so I'll leave it there. I know there's time for folks to have some closing remarks, but this has been such a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate all of the powerful examples. They really paint a picture.
Oh, darn. He's frozen. Well, there we go. Well, I know what he was going to say.
Now it's on us as we go back to our places to really, but I'll turn it back over to you, Christy.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate you. Okay, panelists, I'm so glad that you've all been here today, but we're just going to wrap up really quickly. You have a few minutes. And if you'll share one way that our webinar audience can get involved with your work. And so we're going to start with you, Kim, and we're just going to roll right through. All right. So take it away, Kim.
Well, this has been such a rich and wonderful conversation this afternoon. I would love to invite folks to continue the conversation. The Forum is hosting a national conference starting in 3 weeks in Detroit, Michigan. And so we'll put the link in the chat. Leaders from around the country who are wanting to work together to do this, the collaboration, thinking differently, acting differently to better support our young people and communities. So would invite you to join us, and we'll have more rich conversation like we've had today.
Right, I think I'm next. I'll go quick.
You are, but you are. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go for it. I'll drop also a couple things in the chat, and I know there'll be some follow-up, but just a quick reminder that this work is not easy. If it wasn't, like, we wouldn't be in it. So like, don't let that discourage you. As like, that's my like vocal takeaway. The good things are hard, and that's for a reason. I will drop a couple resources that we have created in our family engagement work. One is an equity and family engagement toolkit resource. And then also we are doing a conference convening in October in Omaha, Nebraska. So I'll drop that link as well. And then I'll also drop my email. A couple of you were asking about our program. So please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk about our Activate work. So thanks for allowing me to be here. And I think, Jose, I'm passing it to you next.
Pass the torch. Yes. Gotta unmute myself. I'll put in the chat for you all, because here's a great opportunity. The only one there is a National Community Schools and Family Engagement Conference coming up in June in the city of Brotherly Love, where we'll be talking about spreading love and supporting all children. We do have a cap, and we're actually nearing that cap now. The cap is 3,600 people. So you can engage with educators, coordinators, United Ways, universities, the elected officials, grassroots organizer, you name it. This is a very diverse conference where you can run the gamut of ways to engage school and family partnerships. So hope to see you there in Philly. And I'll pass it to Marco.
Thank you, Mr. Munoz. So I put my email in the chat as well. Remember, I am a principal, so keep your remarks. No, I'm kidding. Just throw it out there however you choose. I will do whatever I can to try to connect you some way or give you a little more sense of where we're trying to go. I think the real response I have is get connected either at this particular conference. It's an amazing opportunity. I think that's where you would get some amazing relationships developed. Connect with, obviously, Jose through the Coalition of Community Schools. And the other, I think, response I'd have is just start doing the work. Right? Don't wait for me or wait for Christy. Just get into the work and start asking those questions and connecting to those partners. And thank you again for allowing me to be here.
Thank you all so much. Christy, excellent moderation. Appreciate it. I know there was a lot to get through. Panelists, Marco, Jose, Whitney, Kim, we just cannot thank you enough for sharing your great insights. And I, for one, am going to be clicking on a lot of those links in the chat. I hope our audience will too. So with that, before I do close this out, I want to remind everyone that this session was recorded and you will get an email within the next couple of days with that recording link in the saved chat. So you'll have all the chat links in there that have been shared around and follow-up emails. At this time, Daniel is going to launch a little Zoom poll. Your feedback is very helpful to us as we try to continuously improve and figure out what is going to be most useful to you all as an audience in the field. So please take a minute to do that. And while you do, I want to take a moment to close out this webinar series as a whole. So first, thank you again to the Institute for Educational Leadership, IEL team, for being a great partner on this series. I can't wait to see what we cook up together next. Second, a lot of people at National PTA have made this webinar possible, including our senior leadership, our President Anna King, our President-elect Yvonne Johnson, and our Executive Director Nathan Monell, many of whom, I think all of whom at one point in this series have been in the chat, also interacting with you all. And of course, Daniel Aaron Price, who you all got the pleasure of seeing at the beginning of this webinar, but he is just a masterful coordinator of everything for this series. So Daniel, thank you for all you've done for this. And we're grateful to the 24 speakers and moderators who've given their time and talent to this series. And last, thank you. We want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in to our Transforming Family School Partnerships with the National PTA Standards webinar series, whether you started watching today or you've steadfastly been tuning in to all 5 of the webinars in this series. We are grateful for your attention. Hope that you have taken something actionable away from the conversations. For the school and nonprofit folks in the room, we also hope you'll connect with your local PTA. You can find them in the link Daniel is putting in the chat. If you don't find them and you're interested in starting a PTA, there's some contact information with your state PTA to get that process rolling too. We also encourage you to watch and share the recordings to each of the webinars in this series with your colleagues and contacts. So you can find all of these recordings on the National PTA YouTube page, and we'll be sure to send those out also as a follow-up email to today's webinar for all the registrants. Daniel's also going to pop the links in the chat there. So once again, thank you all for your participation today, and we look forward to hearing about how you are strengthening family school partnerships in your community. Thanks again.